Welcome to Alberta Conservation Association's Harvest Your Own podcast, the resource for everything hunting, navigating through the field, the butcher shop, and the kitchen. Life is all about great food. Let's get started.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Brad Fenson, an avid outdoor enthusiast who has worked as a freelance journalist, photographer, and public speaker for over 3 decades. I have hunted, fished, and foraged all my life and hope to share my passion for the outdoors. Along the way, I want to encourage everyone to harvest wild proteins and enjoy the satisfaction of providing the next meal for your family. Our goal is to educate, entertain, and inspire individuals to get outdoors and create a connection between food, health, and your future meals. Welcome to Harvest Your Own. Today's guest is a forager, gardener, historian, teacher, and most importantly, a new hunter. Welcome, Alex Despins.
Hi, it's great to be here.
You've had an interesting journey over the last couple of years. I know your brother's fairly new to hunting, but he's had a big influence on you as well. But just tell us, before we get started, a little bit about yourself and what you do, what your interests are.
Yeah, my interests are all over the place. So that's led me to some really interesting adventures and lots of great stories to share. And I love to share stories and to talk. So like you said, I grew up, I wanted to be a teacher. My grandparents were all teachers. But when I got to university, I fell in love with archaeology and history and anthropology and culture. And I really couldn't decide between the two. So I ended up teaching at a museum, which I think is pretty perfect.
It's like blending the best of all your worlds, all your interests.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're putting together courses and I guess with COVID, not so much meeting with the public at the front door, but you've dealt with school groups and what now? Are you developing online stuff or booklets, or where's the program going?
Yeah, it's definitely outside the museum now. We're trying to reach into the classrooms and make connections virtually, and we're finding that teachers are in need of resources. They've been put in a position they didn't expect to be in either, and we still want to make connections with the students and let them know that, the museum is a part of their education and their journey and their community as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just so that everyone knows, the museum is in St. Albert. What's it called?
Musée Héritage Museum.
Right. And the one thing that you mentioned that was intriguing to me is that a lot of the culture and history for this part of Alberta has a very strong hunting heritage. Yeah,
it does. It goes beyond just the fur trading and reaches back to the history of this land, right? The First Nations people, they've adapted and survived and thrived, and, their entire culture is based on a connection to the land. And so that has come forward through history, engaging with the fur traders and teaching them how to live in this land and to survive, and the newcomers and the immigrants as well. And, the Métis, the culture really came out of that relationship between these two cultures that are connected to the land in a very intimate way. And the Métis, I think, brought the best of both of those cultures together, and were phenomenal bison hunters and horseback riders, and imagine riding a horseback, holding on with your legs, no-handed, loading a musket and firing at a raging bison. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it sounds like a wild ride at the old Klondike days, but a lot more dangerous. It's interesting to look back at our history, though, because society nowadays doesn't have the connection from where we came. And hunting was a big part of that. And I think society as a whole doesn't understand hunting. Did you grow up in a hunting family?
No, I didn't. My grandma, she had a farm. And so I do remember, going out into the bush and building teepees and forts and things like that with my siblings. And you only came home when you heard the call for dinner time. And and they had an elk farm and a boar farm. So I'm sure that was the meat that was on the table. I just never noticed as a kid, right? It was just food.
Right. And, I asked you before we got started if you grew up in a family that ate wild game regularly, and your answer was not that I know of.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? So, I mean, it was a part of the family, part of the culture, part of their livelihood raising stuff. So more than likely you ate it and just weren't sure what it was.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's an important message too, because a lot of people that aren't hunters think, wild game, it's got to be very strange and different. But, they serve it in restaurants. Lots of people that live off the land enjoy it every day, and it's not strange and different. It's very good for you. It's high in nutrition and vitamins and iron and all the nutrients we need. And when you cook it properly, it's as good as any proteins available to us today anywhere. And I think you're discovering that.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You grew up not knowing that you're eating wild game, but you do now.
Yeah, I do. And I got to thank you for that, coming over for dinner and eating food that, if you didn't tell me, I wouldn't have known. It's so good. And it's always fun to try new, foods and things like that. And for me, the big obstacle is learning how to cook it.
Right.
And that's a really exciting process that I'm getting into.
It's not a strange obstacle, because people that cook domestic meat often don't know how to cook it properly either. And take it even further, somebody that overcooks beans or peas and they turn into mush, you don't enjoy them as much as when they're cooked properly either. So cooking is a process that you learn, just like hunting. You got to spend more time at it, and the more you do it, the better you get at it.
And I didn't really cook before because I didn't think about what I ate. And it really was, when I started to get fresh vegetables from the garden and fresh rose hips and things like that, and meat, suddenly I had to figure out, okay, well, how am I going to make this taste good? Because I worked awfully hard to get it. Right.
It takes a long time to forage that stuff and pick everything. You've had a very interesting journey, though. You're not like the average person. You were actually torn between becoming a vegetarian or taking up hunting, which to some people right now, their heads blowing apart thinking, what? There's no possible way you could be that far across the spectrum in terms of where you'd like to go. But maybe you can just tell us what your thought process was.
Yeah, and it was a long journey, and it took several years, and it did start out through gardening, and I actually never thought that I could garden. I didn't think I had the green thumb. But I had a job that required me to maintain this garden, and I kind of sat in front of it every day and watched it grow and realized that, hey, my hard-boiled eggs could really use some fresh dill, so I could just go out and pick it. And that really was the beginning of the journey for me. And as I'm thinking about the vegetables that I'm growing and eating and where it's come from, I liked that, I could see it from seed to harvest, and I knew everything that went into it. And that kind of naturally led me to, well, what about the meats that I eat? That's the other part of this. And I think there's a lot of concern about where our meat comes from, and I think it's part of a wider thing that's happening in society, because if people weren't concerned, A&W wouldn't be selling, free range, hormone free meats and things like that.
Correct. Yeah.
So it's definitely not something that I was alone in, and especially being in university, there was a lot of conversations and a lot of vegetarians, and it was something that, I felt strongly I had to make a change, and it was in line with my values, but I'm anemic, and that's very common among women, especially to have low iron. And I tried it for 3 months, and I was doing more harm than good. And that's not to say that people, in that same situation don't make it work for them and are very healthy. But I wanted the meat, and
right.
It was something that I missed and I enjoyed, and that's how I wanted to get my protein. So I kind of had to reimagine how I was going to solve all these problems. And then hunting came into my life. So pretty grateful for that.
It sounds like what your strongest appreciation for is things that you have sweat equity in, whether it's planting seeds and fertilizing them and watering them, or going out and finding your own game to put on your table. It just, you're looking not for just a meal, but you're looking for a rewarding meal.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I ever thought about food or connected to my food until I had to work so hard for it. And then if you're going to go through that effort, you definitely want it to taste good.
Absolutely. Lots of people listening might be thinking, hey, I'd like to try hunting and get into it. There's some great resources in Alberta to get you started and give you the information to draw your roadmap.
This podcast is produced for Harvest Your Own, a program dedicated to those who want to reconnect with food and health through their experiences outdoors. HarvestYourOwn.ca is a resource for individuals to learn more about hunting and the outdoors. There's information to get you started and ensure that your compass stays pointed in the right direction to be successful. Where's your next meal coming from?
Well, I follow you on Facebook, and I know that your next meal is probably spruce grouse.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that next weekend.
Right.
It's going to be a new adventure for me.
That's good. Let's jump right into it. How did you get into hunting? How did you get started?
Yeah, I really have to credit my brother, known online as the Crafty Woodsman. We grew up together and we weren't in a hunting family, but there was something in his blood that called him to it. And I remember being a kid and him going out into the soccer fields and trapping gophers. And, I was out skip roping and stuff like that. But I remember my mom screaming, "Not the good towels," as he's dragging these things in. And, he'd hop off to the local fishing pond and catch some crawfish. I remember many, fish bowls of stinky tanks around the house because he's trying to figure out what to do with these things after he catches them. And he got into hunting on his own and he figured it out. And when he got pretty good at it, he wanted someone to share that with. And I was kind of sitting there like, sure, I'll do it. I'm up for anything, right? I just kind of wanted to spend time with him. So, he took me grouse hunting and then eventually, deer hunting, and following him through the bush and seeing his passion for it. It really made it real for me, and it gave us something to talk about. We're practically different creatures, him and I. I'm a bookworm and he's an outdoorsman.
Right.
And now we have something in common, and I'm an outdoor worm, I guess. I don't know. Did
you initially follow him to the field with the intentions of hunting, or just to spend time with him, and all of a sudden, wow, look at all this. Look what he's doing. I want to be part of that.
Yeah, just to spend time with him. I was looking forward to the long drives out to wherever he was going, and, he'd just tell me, look for this, and that's what I do. But it was really the conversations that were happening in between that I was really looking forward to. And then eventually, it just grew on me.
So it's interesting because we talk a lot about mentors. I couldn't imagine getting into hunting if you didn't have somebody to help you through the process, along the journey, help draw your roadmap for you. So your brother Tim is obviously a pretty good map maker because you're excited about hunting.
Very much so. Yeah, I feel like I live and breathe it now.
Yeah. So again, this monumental leap from do I give up meat and become a vegetarian to I can hardly wait to get back in the bush to get something else for my freezer to sustain us for the rest of the year. Yeah,
definitely. It's a very, I think my core values are the same. It's just the behaviors that have changed. So it's not as big of a leap as I thought, because you don't take it in one step. You take it in a lot of little steps. So it felt very natural.
Right. All right. One of the big questions for today was to talk about becoming a new hunter and what you face as a woman in the outdoors and getting started hunting.
Yeah, I definitely felt pressure to be manly in the wild. And one thing I want to say is you really don't have to. There's another way to hunt, and you just have to find what suits you. Thinking about your limits, like I can't carry as much as the men can carry, and I need to know what I need and what I can take in order to have a safe and comfortable hunt. And that doesn't mean that I can't be a hunter, though. There's so many tools and resources out there that can help you. For example, if you can't string up a deer and butcher it, you can get the spreaders and they'll help you position the deer so that, you don't have to carry all that weight, and you can really pack it down in order to carry it out there, or even just bring a quad. Like, there's nothing wrong with using the equipment and things that are available in order to help you have a successful hunt.
Planning and having the right tools is a big part of it. Over the years, I've used sleighs, wheelbarrows, backpacks, you name it, because no matter what your size or gender, we're all faced with a situation where sometimes we bite off more than we chew. I remember the first moose I shot, and man, that was a lot of work, much more than I anticipated. So your methodical approach is beneficial because it allows you to plan. So it sounds like, I know how to break down a deer. I know how to use game bags. And, the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I'm taking advantage of the kind of early deer seasons in some of the areas, because, if I need to be out there and I need to learn, where am I going to set up and strategize and how am I going to do things? And I've forgotten some pretty important things already that come November, that's going to be a lot more important.
Yeah, and you bring up another interesting point. I know a lot of hunters that really prefer to target those early seasons strictly because they really have trouble dealing with the cold. Yeah,
and I always have to wear at least one more layer than any of the men that I'm with. And that's just my body. And that's not something I can change, but it's definitely something I can plan for.
Right. And I've always said that it's, we're fortunate because we can always dress for the cold. But if we were in a hot climate, there's only so much you can do. And then you're hot, period. So the cold is a challenge, but it could always be worse.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So do you know why you hunt other than just wanting food?
Yeah, I've thought about why I hunt. And for me, hunting is about the relationships that I've formed. So like I mentioned previously, growing a relationship with my brother, and like I said, having those long rides where we talk about life and anything, right? You need to fill up that space, and you can only talk strategy so much. So we've really reconnected in a way that I really never thought we could, before. And the other relationships that I've grown is with the land. Going out into a wild space and feeling like you're kind of coming to your second home, and you see the wild asters and the rose hips and things like that. And it's kind of like greeting an old friend. And it's something that I long for throughout the years. I'm waiting for the season to open up, and you kind of start thinking about these places in a whole new way. And it really doesn't surprise me that hunters can get very possessive of their spots.
Very.
Yeah, and it's not just about the competition. You could always go somewhere else to hunt the same things where there's less competition. It's about feeling that connection to this place that you've spent time in and you've gotten to know and you've invested yourself in. Very much emotionally. Hunting is an emotional experience.
It is, and I have a couple spots like that are, my escape. When I get out hunting and want to rekindle everything I feel from the outdoors, I go to the place I know best. I feel like every square inch of it. You've explored it. You know where the deer are, where they move, where they bed, where they feed, and you're surprised when you find a new trail or something. So I fully understand that. How many years have you been doing this now?
I went out with him 2 years ago. And so we had one busy winter of hunting. It was pretty intensive. And then, this year he's kind of pushed me out of the bird's nest. So it has not been a long time.
No. And I bring it up because it's interesting how quickly you develop a passion for it, right? 2 years.
Yeah.
People think, well, you have to be a hunter for 30 years to have this, drive and passion and want for the outdoors. But you were introduced to it, had a small taste of it, jumped in with both feet, and now know that it's part of you.
Yeah, and it really is those relationships and that connections you form. They become a part of you very quickly, and they just happen on so many different layers. Like, we talked before about kind of connecting to my food and creating a relationship with that from seed to harvest, or going out and collecting the food as well, and learning how to cook and all that stuff. And then I mentioned, the Métis before as well. And so having Métis ancestors, I can now connect to my ancestors in a way that I couldn't before. Like, we're learning about the same environments. Did they harvest this muskeg, tea, or, did they drink these things? Did they eat these things? Were they walking in these trails? So it's very easy to become passionate about something that you just connect with on so many levels.
So you probably don't realize this, but that historian, anthropologist, teacher has followed you right into your hunting career.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So you have a strong desire to learn and know more about your culture, past, and how it's tied to history, and that's awesome. What's the first thing you harvested?
The first thing I harvested that I didn't grow myself would probably have to be, grouse. A grouse. Yeah.
And that's very common. I think that was the first thing I ever shot too. It's a great thing to start with. Did you enjoy it? Tell me a little bit about what you experienced.
It was probably the greatest thing that I'd ever done. And grouse hunting is like a game. And it's just so much fun. And, you just look for that tiny little head, that silhouette. And it's just so exciting. And then all this action happens. And, they're silly little creatures, and you can't help but be fond of them because, they don't think about the gun. They don't hear it. I don't know what it is. They just don't respond to the first shot. And they really give you a second chance to get them before they flutter off into the trees. And that's a lot of fun, especially as a new hunter, because I could actually do it.
Right.
Yeah.
And be successful.
Yeah, exactly.
People looking for information on how to get started, what kind of gear to use, how to plan your first adventure, they need to go to Harvest Your Own.
This podcast was made possible by Alberta Conservation Association and the Harvest Your Own community. If you're interested in harvesting your own food, there's a comprehensive collection of information to gain insight and knowledge. Head to the field, harvest your own protein, prepare it, and taste the results. HarvestYourOwn.ca is a library of information from getting started and geared up to processing, butchering, and cooking wild game to make the connection between health and food.
That's the connection you're looking for, right? Health and food.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's important. I think lots of people are thinking about that today. You started off with grouse, which is very common and a great species on the table. It's a very good introduction to hunting. But last year you went on your first deer hunt as well.
Yeah, and that was a brutal experience because it was minus 20 without the wind chill. Right. And we spent all day out there stalking, just walking around, trying not to make any noise, struggling to warm my fingers and my toes, but none of that mattered in the end. When you're face to face with, this beautiful, majestic animal, I see that experience as it gave itself to me. And there's really that deer, there's no other way to explain it. My brother got me to that animal and he handed me that gun and it just stood there and it stared at me and it didn't move and it didn't smell us. It didn't see us. We were totally invisible to it. And it just waited. And I had all the time in the world. I must have only been seconds, but it felt like an entire world to just get that shot right. And I kind of laugh because my brother is sitting there vibrating and he doesn't know what to do. And he's thinking should I take this gun from her? Because, she's not going to be able to do it. And it just waited. And it waited for me to get it right. And it did feel like it gave itself to me. So I was incredibly grateful to that animal. I just walked over, and it was just a moment between, me and that creature. And it was beautiful. It was a beautiful experience.
And that's a good description of what you feel, because, I think a lot of us have Disney syndrome where Bambi and all the rest of it, but you relate to the animal. Your words about, I felt like it gave itself to me, are very important.
Yeah, and I think a lot of new hunters or people who are considering hunting, they really struggle with whether or not they can go through with that moment and take that shot. And I think that's why knowing why you're hunting is so important, because, when that time finally comes, there's nothing else to feel but that connection to the land, to the animal, to my brother, to my ancestors. It's all right there. And so there's no room for sorrow in that. It's just beautiful.
Yes. And, I have taken people out that have been sad and they shot something the first time. And I think out of respect, they had tears in their eyes and it was hard, but they went back and did it again.
Yeah, it's definitely a profoundness.
Right.
More than a sadness.
Do you have any advice for other women or anybody that wants to get into hunting and not knowing where to start?
Yeah. I mean, these resources that you're putting out are pretty valuable, especially finding a mentor is really important, and that'll help you just know where to start, and you'll have someone to kind of go through that process with you. And I mean, I used Harvest Your Own to figure out how to harvest that grouse, because I kind of acted like a pessimist going out for my first time on my own and getting this grouse. I didn't realize how pessimistic I was about my skills until I had, 4 grouse, and I'm like, I didn't look up how to, butcher it and clean it. And so I had to look up, and I used the waterfowl video and I'm like, okay, I could do this. It was, after that, it just kind of had to get my gears started and get thinking about it. And then, a grouse is very similar to a chicken. So that's something that most people are really familiar with, and they can use that experience to kind of guide them along.
Yeah, it's interesting that I'm glad you use Harvest Your Own, and those tools are there for anyone that needs to put the dots together, from A to B. It's not just about getting a firearm and a bow or something to go harvest an animal. It's what you do after it. How do you process it? How am I going to cook it so everyone likes it, including me? The other thing I'd like to talk about today, because as a new hunter, you found yourself really defending yourself and being a bit of a myth buster.
Yeah, once I told people that I was a hunter, and actually the same kind of issues started to come up. People, one of the comments that I heard most often was, well, I can kind of get behind hunting, but definitely not trophy hunting, not that. And I kind of had to sit back and say, what is your understanding of what hunting is and what trophy hunting is? And I quickly realized that people didn't realize that if you hunt an animal, you have to harvest it. You have to take the meat. And trophy hunting is no different. You can't just take the skull and the hide and walk away. You have to eat that animal.
Right. But what you were actually facing is people thought as soon as you said, I'm a hunter, they thought you were going out for the antlers and the horns.
Yeah, exactly.
And they didn't understand at all why you were doing it strictly for the meat and not looking for antlers and horns even. Yeah,
and they didn't understand that you can harvest the antlers and the skin, and that doesn't affect the meat. It's not kind of an either or situation. And in fact, if you're harvesting more of that animal, less of it is going to waste. And I think that's better overall.
Right. And I mean, you've jumped in with, if you had 4 feet, you'd be using 4 feet, but tanning hides and doing arts and crafts with antlers and all kinds of stuff. You've taken things to the next level.
Yeah, and it really is just the respect for the animal. If I can use it, why not?
Right. Any other myths or ethics that you had to deal with and explain to your friends and people in your circles. Ethics in hunting are always a big one, right? Because ethics are personal, and I know that you have strong ethics for the animal. It's the utmost respect. The animal gives its life for you. And it's funny, up in the Yukon, I've got a friend that I've spent a lot of time over the years hunting and fishing. And, the First Nations people up there say, if you catch a fish, he's offered his life, you shouldn't put him back. They don't believe in catch and release. So, in certain areas where we went out, if we caught a fish, we'd keep it, and quit fishing for the day. And it's a different mindset, but ethics always come into play. And if you do it right and utilize the animal fully, right down to the hides, antlers, everything else, I think it creates a lot of pride in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. Yeah,
people think of hunting as, well, I can't say everyone does, but, there's certainly a good amount of people who think that you go out and you just shoot something and you kill it, and that's what hunting is. But hunting for me is the laws, the regulations, and the ethics. The law says that I can carry a gun, and regulations tell me where I can hunt and how I can hunt, but ethics is up to me, and I decide, do I pull the trigger, and what do I do after the fact? And again, law says I have to use something, but it's my decision that says I have to use as much as possible. And a situation that really illustrates this is when you're lined up for the perfect shot and everything is just perfect, and then the wind changes, or the deer shifts, or something changes after you've committed to that trigger, and you wound the animal instead of a clean hunt, and law says you have to go looking for it, but it doesn't say how long, and that is up to the hunter, and that's up to the hunter's ethics. And how long do they track that animal for? Could be an hour, 3 hours, 6 hours, 3 days, and that's up to your heart and your mind, and that's not something the law can tell you.
Yeah, and it's interesting to bring that up because everyone faces that as a hunter at some point. And I've been with people over the years where we basically everyone quit hunting to track an animal, and sometimes it took 2 days. But I'd like to think in most cases we did catch up with it and finish the job. So ethics are important. I think it's a big part of it. And just how you think about hunting overall, it's the respect for the animal, right? That's what it comes down to for me too, and that's why I try to utilize everything and promote using everything from the shanks to the neck to you name it, just to make sure that animal's fully utilized.
Yeah, and that can be a pretty intimidating process. You definitely don't have to start out that way, right? If you can use just what you can. Like last year, I took the whole deer and I chopped it up and I took it to the butchers and they made sausage and was that the best thing to do? No, but that's all I could do because I didn't know how to do the rest of it. There's always someone out there that can help you take it to that next level, that next step. But this year I'm definitely going to be making my own food because I want it to my taste.
Right. And you've tried deer backstrap and steak and stuff, and now it's like, I think I like that a lot more than sausage.
Yeah, I know it can be much better.
I ask this question from everyone. What's your favorite wild game meal or recipe?
I'd have to say anything that's cooking over at the Fensons for sure. But I think the most exciting thing about being a new hunter is that I haven't eaten it yet. There's so many new experiences, there's so many new recipes, there's so many new games to go after, and really the whole world is open in front of me. And so I'm excited to figure out what that is. The bear macaroni and cheese sounded pretty darn good, though.
You were listening to the Josh Glover episode. Yeah, Josh definitely has a passion in the kitchen as he does in hunting. And I'm glad you use Harvest Your Own. It's a great testament to the information that's there. The Alberta Conservation Association definitely saw a need for people wanting to get into hunting and harvesting their own game and proteins and stuff. And I'm just glad to hear that it's getting used and that it's useful. There's lots of reasons why you go back and visit it. So I'd like to thank you for coming on the show today and sharing your life story, your passion, your information, and really promoting Harvest Your Own. I think your information will encourage other women to get into the outdoors, take up hunting. And, I'd like to think that people will be more philosophical about life, plant their own garden, know where their food comes from. That sweat equity that you have to put in to earn your next meal makes it much more rewarding.
Yeah, things taste better when you work for it.
Right. We hope to inspire people to reconnect with nature and appreciate where your food comes from by harvesting your own. For more information on getting started or to learn specifics about the Field to Fork experience, visit harvestyourown.ca and follow on Facebook and Instagram. Check back often for new material, recipes, and videos that are posted regularly. Please subscribe to Harvest Your Own podcast and take the time to rate and review the show to help us build a dedicated core of passionate hunters as our regular audience. Until next time, embrace the outdoors and all it has to offer. Thanks for joining us.